I was standing alone in an empty gymnasium at 6:40 in the evening, holding my daughter's cheer bag in both hands, and the only sound in that entire building was the buzz of a fluorescent light that had been flickering above the bleachers since September and no one had ever bothered to fix. Practice had ended 40 minutes earlier. Every other girl had already been picked up, hugged, buckled into a passenger seat, driven home to dinner going cold on a stove somewhere. My daughter's bag was still sitting on the third bleacher exactly where she always left it, her water bottle still capped beside it, and her phone, the phone she never once let out of her sight, was nowhere. I called her 11 times before I stopped counting. I want to tell you that a mother knows immediately when something is wrong, that some invisible thread between us pulled taut the moment she didn't come home, but the truth is messier than that. The truth is, I stood in that gymnasium for almost 10 full minutes, convincing myself she'd simply lost track of time, that 15-year-olds do that I was overreacting the way I always overreacted, before the assistant coach walked out of the equipment closet with a look on her face that told me she had already been waiting there to tell me something, and had been dreading the moment I walked through that door. My name is Dr. Renee Winters. I am a pediatrician. I have spent 20 years learning how to stay calm while other people's children are in danger, and nothing prepared me for the particular kind of terror of not knowing where my own child was, or for what I would eventually learn she had been hiding from me, and why. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. I'm a pediatrician in Louisville, Kentucky. 43 years old, married 19 years to a man named Nathaniel, mother to an 8-year-old son who still believes I can fix anything, and, until that Tuesday evening, mother to a 15-year-old daughter I thought I knew completely. Nora had always been the easy one. Good grades, loyal friends, a cheer schedule she managed better than I managed my own calendar. So when the assistant coach told me Nora had left practice on foot instead of waiting for her ride, and that she'd been doing exactly that for almost 3 weeks, I realized there was an entire version of my daughter's life I had not been paying attention to. 3 questions sat in my chest like stones the moment I left that gymnasium, and I didn't get honest answers to any of them for longer than any mother should have to wait. Where had she actually been going for 3 weeks straight, on foot, telling no one? Why had her phone been smashed, not lost, not dead, smashed, deliberately, and hidden inside a locker that wasn't even assigned to her? And why, when I finally learned the truth, did my 15-year-old daughter look at me, not with fear of being caught, but with the quiet, stubborn certainty of someone who believed she'd done exactly the right thing and would do it again? To understand why that gymnasium felt like the floor dropping out from under me, you have to understand what our family actually looks like on an ordinary Tuesday, because this story only makes sense against the backdrop of how ordinary everything had seemed right up until it wasn't. My husband, Nathaniel, works long hours in commercial real estate, the kind of job that means he is usually the one running late to dinner rather than me, which still makes people laugh when they hear it, because everyone assumes the doctor in the marriage is the one who's never home. My son is 8, obsessed with dinosaurs, in the specific and exhausting way that only 8-year-olds can be, and he has a habit of narrating his own life out loud in the back seat of the car that I have come to find more soothing than almost anything else in my day. And my daughter Nora is 15. Sharp, funny, private in the ordinary way teenagers are private, and for the last 2 years entirely devoted to competitive cheer. I want to be honest about something, because this channel has taught me that honesty matters more than looking like a perfect mother. I have missed things. I missed my son's school play last spring for an emergency surgery consult. I have, more than once, been the parent scrolling a phone at a dinner table instead of actually listening. My mother-in-law, Geraldine, has never let me forget the year I missed Nora's 8th birthday for a medical conference, and she brings it up with a regularity that would be exhausting if I didn't, somewhere underneath the irritation, understand that she's not entirely wrong to hold on to it. My father-in-law, Harold, rarely says much about any of this. He is the kind of man who watches a family the way he used to watch juries. I imagine, quietly cataloging who is paying attention and who isn't, and offering his opinion only when he's certain it will matter. So, when I say Nora had always been the easy one, I mean it the way parents mean these things. which is to say, I mean it because I had stopped looking closely enough to know whether it was still true. There had been small things, in the weeks before that Tuesday, that I noticed and then set down without examining. The way you set down a strange sound in an old house because investigating it feels like more trouble than it's worth. Nora had started keeping her phone face down on every surface, which she'd never done before. She'd started declining rides home from practice twice, then 3 times, telling me a teammate's older sister was driving a group of them and it was easier. She'd stopped inviting her closest friend, a girl named Harper Setzer, over to our house on weekends, the way she used to almost every Friday since the two of them made varsity together as freshmen. And when I asked her about it once, in the offhand way you ask your teenager things while unloading a dishwasher, she'd said only that Harper's family situation was complicated right now, in a tone that closed the subject before I'd even fully opened it. I knew Harper's mother, Sonia, a little. We'd exchanged the polite half-friendship of cheer parents standing together at competitions, holding the same paper cups of bad concession stand coffee, complimenting each other's daughters' tumbling passes. I knew Sonia had remarried about a year and a half earlier, a man named Dwayne Sharp, and I knew almost nothing else about him beyond the fact that he picked Harper up from practice sometimes in a truck that idled loudly enough in the parking lot that I'd noticed it more than once without ever thinking much of it. Nathaniel, when I mentioned to him one night that Nora seemed different lately, quieter, more guarded, less inclined to let either of us into the small daily texture of her life, told me I was reading too much into normal teenage behavior, and for weeks I let myself believe him, because it was easier than sitting with the alternative, which was that my daughter had a whole interior life I'd stopped tracking closely enough to notice changing. I think about that a lot now. How much of parenting a teenager is choosing, every day, what to let go of and what to chase down. How you can love a child with your entire body and still miss the exact moment she starts carrying something too heavy to set down in front of you. I didn't know, standing in my kitchen those last few ordinary weeks, that my daughter had quietly decided she couldn't tell me the truth about where she'd really been going after practice. Not because she didn't trust me, as I would later learn, but because she'd made a promise to someone else first. And Nora has never in her life been a person who breaks a promise once she's made it, even when keeping it costs her everything. The assistant coach's name was Dean Presnell, and I want to tell you honestly that in the first 10 minutes of that gymnasium, before I knew anything real, I looked at him the way I imagine every parent looks at the nearest adult when their child is missing, with a kind of instant, unfair suspicion I'm not proud of. He was young, maybe 26, newer to the program than the head coach, and he had a habit of standing a little too close when he corrected a girl's form that had bothered me once or twice in an inarticulate way I'd never mentioned to anyone. When he told me Nora had been leaving practice on foot for weeks, my first thought, my only thought, was that this young man knew exactly where my daughter was and exactly why, and that he was standing in front of me, choosing his words with the careful precision of someone protecting himself rather than helping me. She said a friend's older cousin was driving a few of them, he told me, not quite meeting my eyes, which at the time felt like confirmation of something terrible rather than what it actually was, which was simple embarrassment at having noticed a pattern and said nothing about it for 3 weeks running. I should have called someone. I know that now. I just didn't think it was my place. I called Nathaniel from the parking lot, and I heard my own voice come out steadier than I felt. The voice I use in a trauma bay when a room full of frightened parents needs someone to sound like they have already survived the worst part. He left work immediately. By the time he arrived, I had already called the school, already called 2 of Nora's teammates' mothers, already driven the entire route between the gym and our house twice, scanning both sides of the road the way you scan an X-ray for the one shadow that shouldn't be there. It was Nathaniel who said the word first, police, and I remember resenting him for it for one irrational, guilty half-second, as though saying it out loud made it more true than it already was. We filed the report at 8:15 that night. The officer who took our statement was polite and unhurried in a way that made my hands shake with impatience, until a detective named Gordon Radford arrived 20 minutes later, took one look at the smashed phone the school custodian had found earlier that same day inside an unassigned locker 3 down from Nora's own, and told us, gently, but without any softening of the actual facts, that a deliberately destroyed phone changed the shape of this case considerably. Kids lose phones. Kids drop them, Detective Radford said, turning the shattered device over once in a gloved hand before bagging it. This one was hit, hard, more than once, against something flat. That's not an accident, and it's not carelessness. Somebody wanted whatever was on this phone gone before anyone else could see it. I asked him what that meant, and he was honest with me in a way I have come to respect enormously in the weeks since, even though in that moment I wanted him to simply tell me my daughter was fine. He said it could mean several things. It could mean someone else had done this to her and to her phone both. It could mean Nora had done it herself, to protect something or someone, and had then either run or been taken before she could explain why. He would not speculate further than that, and some cold, clinical part of my brain, the part that has delivered bad news to parents for 2 decades, recognized that restraint as competence rather than coldness, even as the mother in me wanted to shake an answer loose from him by force. Geraldine arrived at our house within the hour, having heard from Harold, who had heard from Nathaniel's assistant, in the particular chain of family communication that always seems to move faster than any of us intend. She stood in my kitchen wringing a dish towel she'd picked up without noticing she'd picked it up, and for once in the 11 years I've known her, she said nothing critical at all. Not about the missed birthday, not about the medical conference, nothing. She simply asked what she could do, and when I had no answer for her, she made a pot of coffee no one drank and sat with Elijah in the next room, so he wouldn't have to watch his parents fall apart in real time. Harold arrived 20 minutes after her, said almost nothing, and made 2 phone calls from our back porch that I did not overhear and did not ask about until much later. By 10 o'clock that night, 3 of Nora's teammates had been contacted and interviewed, each of them independently confirming the same detail. For the last several weeks, Nora had been walking somewhere after practice instead of waiting for her ride, always alone, always refusing company, always vague about where. None of them knew where, or if they knew, none of them were willing to say it in front of a detective and 2 visibly frightened parents. It was Harper Setzer's name that came up twice in those interviews, mentioned only in passing, that Nora and Harper used to be close, that they'd drifted apart in recent weeks in a way that had struck at least one teammate as strange, given how inseparable they'd been for 2 years before that. I filed the name away without urgency. I had no reason yet to think Harper mattered to any of this. I would learn, before that night was fully over, exactly how wrong that assumption was, and exactly how much my daughter had been carrying alone, rather than bring it to me. If you have a daughter of your own, or you remember being 15 and certain you were protecting someone by staying quiet, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. And if this is pulling you in already, go ahead and hit that like button before we keep going, because it truly helps this channel more than you know. By midnight, our street had 2 patrol cars parked along the curb, and somehow, in the way these things move faster than anyone intends, a local news van had already found its way to the end of our driveway. I remember standing at my own front window, watching a reporter check her lipstick in a compact mirror, using the glow of her phone, preparing to describe my daughter as a missing Louisville teen to strangers eating dinner in front of their televisions, and feeling something close to rage that I had nowhere useful to put. Detective Radford asked to speak with Nora's school counselor first thing the next morning, and asked us, gently but directly, whether either of us knew of any adult in Nora's life. A coach, a tutor, a family friend, who had access to her outside of school hours, and who we might not have fully considered. I understood immediately what he was asking, and I understood, watching Nathaniel's jaw tighten beside me, that he was thinking the exact same thing I was. Dean Presnell. I am not proud of what happened over the next 36 hours, because I participated in it, quietly, the way frightened people participate in things they will later regret. A rumor moved through the cheer program faster than any actual evidence did, that Coach Presnell had been seen texting a student outside of team channels, that he'd once given a girl a ride home without informing her parents, that he'd been let go from a previous gym under circumstances nobody could quite name. 2 other parents called the gym owner directly, demanding his immediate suspension. I did not make that call myself, but I did not discourage it either, and when Detective Radford interviewed him formally on the second day, I sat in my kitchen hoping, with a shame I still carry, that he would simply confess to something, so this would be over. He did not confess to anything, because there was nothing to confess. Detective Radford's investigation cleared him within 48 hours. His phone records showed exactly what he'd told us from the beginning. A single group text to 3 girls' families about a schedule change, nothing more. And the previous gym rumor turned out to be nothing but a misremembered detail about a coach with a similar last name who had left an entirely different program 2 states away. When Radford told us this, standing in our living room with a patience I did not deserve, I felt the specific, sick shame of having let fear turn me into someone willing to ruin an innocent young man's reputation simply because he was the nearest available target for a fear I couldn't otherwise direct anywhere. "I understand why you looked at him first," Radford said, not unkindly. "Parents always do. It's rarely the answer, though. Statistically, when a kid this age goes quiet and starts hiding things, the person she's protecting is almost never a stranger. It's someone she already loves, and she's decided the cost of telling you is higher than the cost of carrying it alone." That sentence sat in my chest for the rest of that day, because I didn't yet understand who Nora could possibly be protecting badly enough to disappear rather than tell me. The break came from an unexpected direction. A woman named Mabel Ivy, an elderly widow who lived 4 streets over from Harper Setzer's family and attended the same small church as Sonia's mother, called the tip line the department had set up, hesitant and apologetic, saying only that she'd noticed 2 teenage girls coming and going from her detached garage apartment more evenings than she felt entirely comfortable with, and that she hadn't wanted to make trouble for anyone. But the news segment about a missing Louisville teenager had made her uneasy enough to finally say something. Detective Radford drove out there himself within the hour and called me from Mabel Ivy's driveway with a voice I will never forget for the rest of my life. Careful, deliberately calm, the voice you use to deliver news that could still go either way. "Your daughter's here," he told me. "She's safe. She's physically fine. But Dr. Winters, there's a lot more to this than a missing teenager, and I think you need to come see this yourself before I explain it over the phone." I don't remember the drive there. I remember Nathaniel's hands on the wheel, white-knuckled, and I remember Geraldine, of all people, sitting in our back seat with her hand resting flat against my shoulder blade the entire way, saying nothing, which from her has always meant she is holding herself together as tightly as she can manage for someone else's sake. If you've ever felt that specific mix of relief and dread, the moment you learn your child is safe, but you can tell from someone's voice that safe is not the same thing as this is over, I want to hear about that moment in your comments, because I don't think enough people talk honestly about how complicated relief can actually feel. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe now, because Nora's part in what happened next changed how I think about my own daughter permanently. What I found in Mabel Ivy's garage apartment was not the scene of a kidnapping. It was a 15-year-old girl I did not entirely recognize. My own daughter, sitting cross-legged on a second-hand couch with her arm wrapped protectively around Harper Setzer, whose left cheekbone carried a fading yellow-green bruise, old enough to be a week healed, and whose eyes, when they met mine, held an exhausted, wary bravery I will not forget for as long as I live. Nora looked at me first with fear. Real fear, the kind that made my chest ache. And then, when I said nothing except her name, something in her shoulders came down half an inch, as though she had been waiting 3 weeks for someone to finally be angry at the right person, instead of at her. "I couldn't tell you," Nora said, before I had asked a single question, her voice cracking on the word couldn't, in a way that told me this had cost her far more than a smashed phone. She made me promise. She said if anyone knew, he'd find a way to make it worse. And I believed her, Mom, because I saw what he did to her the first time, and nobody believed her then either. Mabel Ivy stood in her own doorway with her arms crossed over a cardigan, looking at the 4 of us. Me, Nathaniel, Detective Radford, and now Sonia Setzer, who had arrived only minutes behind us, ashen and shaking, with the tired, wary expression of a woman who had spent the last 3 weeks quietly deciding whether the right thing to do was call someone or simply keep feeding two frightened teenagers soup on a hot plate and hope it resolved itself before anyone got hurt worse than they already had. She told us later, once things had calmed enough for a real conversation, that Harper had shown up at her door one evening, soaked from the rain, with a black eye she refused to explain, and that some old instinct in her, something left over from a marriage of her own decades earlier that she did not elaborate on, had simply opened the door without asking a single question first. Sonia Setzer's reaction, when she understood the full shape of what her daughter had been hiding from her, was one of the hardest things I have ever watched a parent go through. She did not perform disbelief. She did not defend her husband. She simply sat down hard on Mabel Ivy's porch step, put both hands over her face, and said, quietly, to no one in particular, "I knew. Some part of me knew, and I let myself not know it, because I didn't know what I'd do if I let myself really see it." Detective Radford stepped away to make a call I understood immediately was not about Nora at all anymore. Nora's story came out slowly over the next hour, in pieces, the way stories do when a 15-year-old is telling you something she has spent 3 weeks convincing herself she'd never have to say out loud. Harper had confided in her first almost a month earlier, showing her a bruise along her ribs she said she'd gotten being clumsy, in the specific flat voice of someone who has already rehearsed the lie enough times to say it without flinching. Nora hadn't believed her, and instead of pressing, she had simply started walking Harper home a different way after practice, then further, then eventually to Mabel Ivy's garage apartment once Harper admitted she was too afraid to go home most nights at all. Nora had been using her own allowance to buy them both dinner from a gas station 2 streets over. She had smashed her own phone against the corner of a locker the day she realized Dwayne had somehow gotten hold of her number and had begun texting her directly, demanding to know where Harper was, because she was terrified that if he ever unlocked that phone himself, every message, every location, every piece of proof would disappear, along with any chance of anyone believing them. "I know I should have told you," Nora said to me, finally, once Harper had been examined by paramedics who confirmed the bruising was recent and consistent with what she'd described. "But every single time I tried to imagine that conversation, I kept picturing you calling her mom first, out of politeness, the way parents do, and Dwayne finding out before anyone could actually protect her. I didn't trust the grown-up version of handling this. I only trusted the version where I didn't let go of her hand." If you've ever had a child make an impossible decision like that one, protecting someone else, even at the cost of terrifying their own parent, I want to know what you would have done in Nora's place, so leave that in the comments below. And if this story has you as invested as I still am, remember to turn on notifications for this channel, because what happened with Dwayne Sharp in the weeks that followed is not the clean ending you might be hoping for. The part of this story that changed everything, for me, was not the discovery of where Nora had been hiding. It was what Detective Radford uncovered over the following week, while building an actual case against Dwayne Sharp, because it turned out my daughter's instinct not to trust the grown-up version of handling this had been more justified than any of us wanted to admit. Radford pulled Nora's smashed phone's carrier records and cross-referenced them against a burner number that had been texting her 17 times over 9 days, threatening and increasingly specific, demanding Harper's location in language that made even a hardened detective go quiet reading it aloud to us. That number traced back to a prepaid phone purchased in cash at a gas station 2 miles from Dwayne Sharp's job site. The same gas station, as it happened, where Nora had been buying dinner for herself and Harper most nights. A detail neither of them had ever noticed. A small, ordinary coincidence that made my chest ache when Radford pointed it out, because it meant my daughter had been closer to real danger than any of us had let ourselves imagine. More damning still, Radford discovered that this was not, in fact, Dwayne Sharp's first documented incident. 2 years earlier, before he married Sonia, a previous partner had filed a report against him in a different county that had gone nowhere. No charges, a case closed for insufficient evidence, the kind of paper trail that exists in a filing cabinet somewhere and changes nothing about a man's life unless someone eventually goes looking for it. Radford went looking. He drove to that county himself on his own time, according to Sonia, who learned this only weeks later and told me about it with something between gratitude and disbelief. as though she still couldn't quite believe a stranger had cared that much about a case that wasn't officially even his anymore. Most of the time, Radford told me, the day he finally laid the full case out for Nathaniel and me at our kitchen table, these patterns exist in pieces, scattered across counties and case numbers that never talk to each other. Nobody connects them unless somebody's stubborn enough to go looking, and by the time anybody does, 3 more people have already been hurt. Your daughter's phone and her refusal to hand over Harper's location might be the only reason this pattern finally got looked at seriously instead of dismissed as one more he said, she said with no proof. I want to be honest with you about what that did to me. Hearing a decorated detective tell me that my 15-year-old daughter's stubborn, secretive, dangerous decision to protect her friend rather than tell an adult may have been the single reason an established, documented pattern of harm was finally taken seriously, because it meant Nora had been right not to trust the system the way I'd wanted her to trust it. It meant her instinct, that grown-ups sometimes move too slowly, too politely, too carefully around men who present well and explain themselves smoothly, had more truth in it than I was prepared to accept from a teenager. Dwayne Sharp was arrested on a Thursday morning at his job site, charged with 2 counts of domestic assault and 1 count of harassment related to the threatening messages sent to Nora's phone. He denied all of it through a lawyer who described the entire situation as a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion by frightened teenagers. Sonia Setzer, for her part, did not go home that week or the week after. She and Harper moved in temporarily with Sonia's own mother across town, and the last time I spoke with her, she told me she was still actually deciding, in real time, with no clean answer yet, whether she would file for divorce or whether some part of her still believed the man she'd married 18 months ago could be separated from the man capable of what he'd done. I did not have a wise thing to say to her about that. I still don't. There was one more piece of this I have to tell you, because it has sat with me almost as heavily as everything involving Dwayne Sharp. I called Dean Presnell myself, once the full truth had come out, and apologized to him directly for the suspicion I'd allowed myself to entertain about him during those first frightened days. He was gracious about it in a way I probably didn't deserve, and told me he understood, that he'd coached long enough to know parents reach for the nearest explanation when they're terrified, and that he'd rather be wrongly suspected for 48 hours than have anyone quietly ignore a genuine warning sign, the way people had ignored Harper's bruises for months before Nora ever noticed them. I asked the gym owner to formally clear his file of the rumor, and I made sure the 2 parents who'd called for his suspension knew, directly from me, exactly how wrong we had all been. It didn't undo the 2 days he spent under a cloud he hadn't earned, but it was the least I owed him. At home, the shift in our family was quieter than I expected, and in some ways harder to describe than the drama of the search itself. Geraldine, who has spent 11 years finding small ways to remind me of every parenting moment she believes I've mishandled, has not once brought up the missed birthday or the medical conference since that week. And I don't think that's coincidence. I think watching Nora carry something that heavy, that long, without either of us noticing, shook something loose in my mother-in-law that none of her usual sharpness could quite paper back over. Harold, for his part, quietly covered the cost of a family counselor's first several sessions for the Setzers without being asked and without ever mentioning it to me directly. I only learned it from Sonia, who thanked me for it before I even knew what she was thanking me for. Elijah, who is 8 and understands more than any of us give him credit for, asked me one night, while I was tucking him in, whether Nora was still in trouble, and when I told him no, that she wasn't in trouble at all, he thought about that for a long moment and said, "Good, because I think what she did was the bravest thing anybody in this whole family has ever done," and then rolled over and went to sleep as though he hadn't just said something that undid me completely. If you've ever watched someone you care about wrestle with an impossible decision, with no clear right answer available to hand them, I want to hear how you supported them, so tell me in the comments below. And please, if this story is resonating with you the way I hope it is, hit subscribe now, because Dwayne's case is still moving through the courts as I record this, and there is more to this story than any single video can hold. I wish I could tell you that this story ends with a clean courtroom scene, a guilty verdict, and a family fully healed on the other side of it. because that is the version that would let me close this chapter and move on with an easy conscience. It doesn't end that way, and I've come to believe that pretending it does would be its own kind of dishonesty toward everyone who lived through it. Dwayne Sharp's case is still working its way through the court system as I record this. His lawyer has already signaled that he intends to fight both charges, arguing that the earlier incident in the other county was never substantiated and shouldn't be admissible, and that the threatening messages sent to Nora's phone can't be conclusively tied to him without further forensic work on the burner device. Detective Radford believes the case is strong. He has also been careful, every time we've spoken, not to promise me an outcome he can't guarantee, which I have come to respect even when it isn't the reassurance I want to hear. Sonia Setzer has not yet filed for divorce, though she has not gone back to living with Dwayne either. She and Harper are still at her mother's house, in a kind of suspended in-between that I recognize now as its own exhausting, honest form of survival. Not resolution, not collapse, just the daily work of getting through a day without a clear map for what tomorrow looks like. She and I have become genuinely close in a way our old cheer parent small talk never suggested we would, and she has told me more than once that the hardest part isn't believing what her husband did, the evidence made that impossible to avoid, but grieving the version of her marriage she'd let herself believe in for 18 months, and learning to be angry at herself for not seeing what her own daughter had been living with under her roof. Harper has started seeing a counselor twice a week, paid for quietly by my father-in-law without ever making it a topic of conversation at family dinner. In the particular way Harold shows love that has taken me 11 years of marriage to fully understand and appreciate. She still comes over to our house most Fridays now, the way she used to before all of this started, and Nora still walks a little closer to her than she used to walk to anyone, as though some part of her is still standing guard, even now that the immediate danger has technically passed. As for Nora and me, we are rebuilding something I didn't fully realize had quietly worn thin until I nearly lost her over it. I have told her, more than once, that I understand exactly why she made the choice she made, and that some part of me is fiercely, painfully proud of the girl who would rather terrify her own mother than abandon a friend in danger. I have also told her, just as honestly, that I need her to trust me enough, going forward, to let me help carry things this heavy, before they reach the point of a smashed phone in an unassigned locker. She has agreed to that, and I believe her. And I also understand that trust rebuilt after a fracture like this one doesn't simply snap back into its old shape. It has to be tested gently, repeatedly, in small, ordinary moments, before either of us fully believes it again. I think about Mabel Ivy often, an elderly widow 4 streets over, who opened her door to a frightened, soaked teenager without asking a single question first, and who very nearly didn't call the tip line at all, out of a fear of making trouble for anyone. I think about how close we came to never finding that garage apartment, to Radford never connecting a burner number to a 2-year-old case in another county, to an entire pattern of harm simply continuing unexamined because nobody happened to be stubborn enough, on that particular week, to go looking. Nathaniel and I have talked, more than once since that week, about how differently we each responded to the fear of those first hours. How quickly he reached for the word police, how quickly I reached for suspicion of the nearest available adult, and how neither instinct, in the end, was the thing that actually found our daughter. It was an elderly widow's discomfort, a detective's stubborn refusal to let a 2-year-old case in another county stay buried, and a 15-year-old's willingness to be the last line of defense when she believed no one else would show up in time. I'm not sure what to do with that, except to sit with the humility of it. Geraldine asked me, a few weeks after everything settled into this uneasy new normal, whether I thought Nora had done the right thing by not telling us sooner. I told her I honestly didn't know, and that I'd stopped needing a clean answer to that question in order to still be proud of my daughter. Geraldine was quiet for a long moment, quiet in the particular way that, from her, I have learned means she is genuinely turning something over rather than preparing her next criticism, and then she said only, I don't think I would have been brave enough, at 15, to choose the harder thing the way she did. I don't think either of us expected that to be the sentence that finally, fully closed the distance between us that had been sitting there, unspoken, for 11 years. I don't have a tidy moral to hand you at the end of this one. I have a 15-year-old daughter who made an impossible choice I both wish she'd never had to face and am quietly, fiercely proud of her for making. I have a family that is closer, in some ways, for having nearly lost something, and further along a road of quiet accountability, in other ways, than we were before. And I have a question I still don't have a clean answer to myself. How do you teach a child to trust the adults around her to help, in a world where sometimes, as Nora believed, the adults move too slowly to matter in time? So here's what I keep coming back to. Weeks later, standing in that same gymnasium sometimes, when I pick Nora up now and watch her wave goodbye to Harper across the parking lot, both of them a little more careful with each other than they used to be, a little more aware of what silence can cost. My daughter chose loyalty to a friend over honesty with her own mother. And in doing so, she may have been the single reason a pattern of harm that had already slipped through one county's system finally got taken seriously in another. I am proud of her. I am also still, if I'm honest, a little frightened by how close we came to a version of this story with a much worse ending. One where nobody happened to notice the truck idling too long in a parking lot, or the bruise explained away as clumsiness, or the girl walking home a different way for reasons nobody thought to ask about. I want to ask you something directly, because I think about it more than almost anything else from this whole ordeal. If your own child came to you and said they'd been keeping a friend's secret that dangerous, that heavy, for weeks, would you be angry first or proud first? And do you think there's a way to teach a teenager to bring a burden like that to an adult sooner, without ever making her feel like loyalty and honesty have to be enemies of each other? I don't have that answer yet myself, and I'd genuinely like to hear how you'd handle it, so please, leave your honest thoughts in the comments below. This is exactly the kind of conversation I think more families should be having out loud instead of quietly assuming they already know the answer. If this story moved you even a little, I'd ask you to do a few small things that genuinely help this channel keep telling stories like Nora's. Hit that like button before you scroll away, because it tells me you want more of these real, complicated family stories rather than the tidy, easy kind. Leave a comment sharing your own thoughts. I read every single one. And some of the most important perspectives on this channel have come directly from viewers who lived through something similar themselves. Share this video with someone in your life who might need to hear it, whether that's a fellow parent, a teacher, or anyone who works with teenagers and might recognize a version of Harper or Nora in someone they know. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next, because Dwayne Sharp's case is still moving through the courts, and I intend to tell you honestly how it resolves, whatever that resolution ends up being. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel, because my life keeps handing me stories I never expected to have to tell, and I have come to believe that telling them honestly, without a tidy bow on top, is worth more to the people watching than any easy, comfortable version ever could be. And one more thing, because I ask this at the end of every story I tell you. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching this from. It has become one of my favorite parts of doing this. Knowing that a story that started in one ordinary gymnasium in Louisville, Kentucky, on one ordinary Tuesday evening, somehow reaches all of you, wherever you happen to be tonight. Thank you for sitting with this one. I'll see you in the next chapter of this life. I keep learning to tell more honestly, one story at a time.